Sophia was just a 12-year-old girl enjoying a simple bus ride with her mother. But in an instant, her world collapsed. Her vision blurred, her body went cold, and the next thing she knew, everything went black. What seemed like an innocent fainting spell was about to turn into her greatest nightmare. Before we dive in, I bet you can't watch this whole video without skipping. It's too intense, too shocking, most people can't handle it. But if you do, prove me wrong by commenting "I did" at the end. Also, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And while you're here, hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe so you never miss a story that will leave you speechless. Now let's get into it. Nobody expects their life to change in the blink of an eye, but for Sophia, that's exactly what happened. One moment she was watching the snowflakes hit the bus window, and the next, she was waking up to the sound of her mother crying. It was just the beginning of a terrifying battle, a battle she never signed up for. And the worst part? Doctors had no idea what was wrong with her. Sophia's mother felt the world tilt beneath her as she watched her daughter's body go limp. It was as if time itself had stopped, the sounds of the moving bus fading into a distant hum. Her hands trembled as she pulled Sophia into her arms, pressing a hand to her daughter's pale, lifeless cheek. Her heart pounded violently against her ribs, her breaths coming out in quick, panicked gasps. "Sophia, wake up! Please, baby!" Her voice cracked, laced with pure desperation. She shook her gently, hoping, praying that it was just a dizzy spell. But Sophia's head lolled to the side, her body completely unresponsive. The passengers on the bus sat frozen, their eyes wide with horror. Some clutched their mouths in shock, while others exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. A few whispered under their breath, murmuring prayers, while a man in the back fumbled with his phone, hastily dialing for help. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his grip tightening on the steering wheels. He realized the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, he veered off course, pressing his foot against the gas pedal. The bus lurched forward, tires screeching against the icy pavement as it sped toward the nearest hospital. The buildings outside blurred past in a haze, but all Sophia's mother could see was her daughter's motionless face. "Hold on, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking Sophia's hair. "Just hold on." By the time they arrived, the emergency room staff was already waiting. The moment the bus door swung open, paramedics rushed inside, their movements quick and practiced. "She collapsed on the bus. She just passed out," Sophia's mother sobbed, barely able to get the words out. One of the paramedics knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers against Sophia's neck to check her pulse. "She's breathing," he said, but his expression was tense. "We need to get her inside. Now." They carefully lifted Sophia onto a stretcher, securing her head and limbs as they carried her toward the hospital entrance. Her mother clung to her hand, refusing to let go. "Ma'am, please step aside," a nurse gently urged. "We need to check her vitals." "No, Her mother's voice cracked as she reluctantly loosened her grip. The stretcher disappeared through the emergency room doors, leaving her standing in the cold hospital corridor, her hands shaking. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the doctors and nurses huddle around her daughter, their voices blending into an overwhelming buzz of medical jargon. She felt helpless, completely and utterly helpless. When Sophia's eyes finally fluttered open, she was met with a harsh, sterile brightness. The ceiling above her was a blinding white, the fluorescent lights making her head pound. A soft beeping sound echoed in the distance, steady, rhythmic. Machines. Her body felt heavy, her limbs weak, as if she had been buried under an invisible weight. She turned her head slightly, her vision still blurred, and then she saw her mother. Tears stained her mother's cheeks, her expression a mixture of relief and fear. She reached for Sophia's hand, gripping it tightly. "Mom," Sophia's voice came out as a whisper, dry and strained. "What happened?" Her mother let out a shaky breath, forcing a smile through her tears. "You fainted on the bus, sweetheart. You scared me to death." Sophia blinked slowly. She barely remembered anything. Just a wave of dizziness, a strange ringing in her ears, and then nothing. The door to the hospital room opened, and a doctor walked in, clipboard in hand. He had a warm smile, but there was something behind his eyes, something unreadable. "Sophia, how are you feeling?" he asked gently. She hesitated, trying to put it into words. How was she feeling? Dizzy, confused, weak, like she wasn't completely in control of her own body anymore. I don't know," she admitted. Her mother quickly explained what had happened, her voice laced with worry. The doctor listened carefully, nodding as he flipped through her chart. "It could be exhaustion, or dehydration, he said after a moment. But just to be safe, we'll run some tests. Sophia felt a flicker of relief. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she had just been overexerting herself. Maybe everything would go back to normal. But she was wrong. Days after she was discharged, it happened again. She was in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of water when suddenly the world tilted. Her vision blurred, her ears buzzed, and before she could react, the floor was rushing toward her. Her mother barely caught her in time. "Sweetheart," she gasped, holding Sophia up as she struggled to regain her balance. Sophia felt like she was floating, like her body wasn't entirely hers anymore. Her knees buckled, and she slumped against the counter, her breath shallow. And then it happened again. She was in class listening to the teacher's lecture when the letters on the board began to blur together. The voices around her became muffled, distant. Her chest tightened. The ringing in her ears grew louder. And then, darkness. When she woke up, she was lying on the floor surrounded by concerned faces. Her teacher knelt beside her, holding her wrist. "Sophia, can you hear me?" She blinked sluggishly, her body weak, her head spinning. And that was when she realized this wasn't going away. Soon it wasn't just fainting spells. Headaches pounded against her skull like a relentless drumbeat that never stopped. Nausea twisted her stomach, making food unbearable. Some days she could barely lift her arms, as if invisible chains were weighing her down. Her legs, once strong and steady, became unreliable. One moment she could walk normally. The next, they gave out beneath her like jelly. Her family tried to convince themselves it was something simple. "Maybe she's growing too fast," her father suggested. "Maybe she's not getting enough iron," her grandmother added. But deep down, Sophia knew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The doctor visits became more frequent. Every week she was poked and prodded, subjected to endless tests, blood work, MRIs, brain scans. Each time, the doctors' faces became more serious. Their smiles became thinner. She heard their hushed conversations outside the room. "Her symptoms are progressing. We need to consider more aggressive testing." Until one day, after what felt like hours of waiting in a freezing examination room, the doctor walked in with a different expression. Not reassuring, not uncertain, just grave. Her mother sat up straighter, sensing the shift. The doctor cleared his throat, glancing between them. Then, with a voice steady yet serious, he said, "Sophia, we found something." Sophia's mother's hand went cold in hers, and in that moment, everything changed. The room was still. Not the peaceful kind of stillness, but the kind that makes the air feel heavy, like a storm was about to hit. The hum of the fluorescent hospital lights buzzed overhead, filling the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was steady, but Sophia could hear the uneven breaths coming from her mother beside her. The doctor's words lingered in the air like a ghost. "We've found something." Sophia's mother stiffened, her fingers tightening around her daughter's hand as if she could anchor her to safety. Her grip was ice cold, but Sophia couldn't tell if it was from fear or shock. Maybe both. Her mother's voice barely came out. What do you mean?" The doctor sighed, flipping through the thick stack of medical reports in his hands. His expression was calm, professional, but there was something else there too, something unreadable. Regret, maybe. He exhaled and looked up. "Sophia has metachromatic leukodystrophy, MLD. It's a rare neurological disorder that affects the brain and nervous system. It causes the progressive loss of motor and cognitive function." The words barely registered in Sophia's mind. Rare, neurological disorder, progressive? None of those words sounded good. Her mother let out a shaky breath, her face going pale. But there's a cure, right? There's something we can do?" Her voice cracked at the end, betraying the panic she was trying so hard to suppress. The doctor hesitated. That pause, just a second too long, made Sophia's stomach drop. "There's no definitive cure," he admitted, his voice careful. "We can manage the symptoms with medication and therapy, but the disease will continue to progress." The words "no cure" echoed in her mind. Sophia sat frozen, staring at the doctor, but his voice was starting to sound distant, like he was speaking underwater. The world around her blurred, yet the sterile white walls of the hospital suddenly felt suffocating, as if they were closing in on her. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Just weeks ago, she was laughing with her best friend at recess, running until her lungs burned, climbing the jungle gym like it was Mount Everest. She was fine. And now a doctor was sitting in front of her, telling her that her body was failing her, that no matter what they did, it would only get worse. Her mother's breathing turned uneven. What happens next?" The doctor's gaze softened. "Right now, Sophia's symptoms are mild. The fainting, the muscle weakness, the headaches. Those are signs that her nervous system is struggling. But as the disease progresses, he trailed off, as if choosing his next words carefully. She may experience loss of coordination, difficulty walking, and even memory problems. Sophia's stomach twisted. Difficulty walking? Memory problems? She didn't recognize the girl the doctor was describing. That wasn't her. That was someone else. Her mother shook her head, as if refusing to accept it. There has to be something we can do, she pleaded. Some kind of treatment? The doctor nodded. There are treatments, physical therapy, medication, even experimental trials. We'll do everything we can to slow it down. But despite his reassurances, things only got worse. The weeks that followed were filled with hospital visits, blood work, and endless awe scans. Nurses smiled at her, trying to be reassuring, but she could see the sadness in their eyes. She wasn't just another patient to them. She was a child with a future they knew she might not have. At home, normal life slipped away. Brushing her hair left her exhausted. Holding a spoon felt like lifting a dumbbell. Some mornings she'd wake up feeling like herself, but by lunchtime her legs would betray her, trembling under her weight until they finally collapsed beneath her. School felt impossible. At first, her classmates showed concern, their hands shooting up when she swayed in her seat. "Are you okay?" they'd ask. "Do you need to go to the nurse?" But concern turned to awkwardness, then distance. By the second month, no one was asking anymore. Teachers stopped calling on her. Friends stopped inviting her out after school. She was slipping away. One evening, she tried to prove to herself that she was still Sophia, that she could still do simple things. She stood up from the couch, determined to walk to the kitchen on her own. Her mother was talking to her father in the other room, their voices hushed, but Sophia could hear it. The fear, the helplessness. She clenched her fists and took a step forward, then another. "See, I can still do this." Then her legs gave out. She crashed onto the hardwood floor, pain shooting up her arms as she tried to catch herself. Her mother ran in, panic in her eyes. "Sophia, are you okay?" Tears burned in Sophia's eyes, not from pain but from frustration. She hated this. She hated feeling weak. "I don't want to be like this," she screamed. "I just want to be normal." Her mother rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace, rocking her gently. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know." But no matter how much she wished it weren't true, there was no fixing this. Hospital visits turned into hospital stays. Sophia spent more time in sterile white rooms than in her own bedroom. The treatments weren't working. The medications weren't slowing things down enough. And then, one cold afternoon, the final blow came. Sophia's mother sat beside her, her hands clasped tightly together, the skin around her knuckles turning white. She already knew the news was bad. She could feel it. The doctor stood in front of them, his expression unreadable. But Sophia had seen enough doctors by now to recognize that look. Defeat. "We've tried everything we can," he said gently, "but the disease is progressing faster than we anticipated." Sophia swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" The doctor took a deep breath. "It means that at this point, surgery is our only option." Silence, repoised. Her mother's face went pale. But the risks? You said before that surgery was too dangerous." He nodded solemnly. "It is. But without it, Sophia's condition will continue to worsen. Eventually, she won't be able to move at all." Sophia's hands trembled in her lap. She had heard the doctors mention surgery before, but they had always said it was a last resort. And now they were out of options. Her mother turned to her, eyes filled with uncertainty. "Sophia, sweetheart, this is your choice. If you don't want to do this, we'll find another way." Sophia looked down at her weak hands. Another way? There was no other way. She had spent so long watching her body deteriorate, feeling herself become a prisoner inside her own skin. She didn't want to live like this. Trapped, helpless, watching life move on without her. She lifted her gaze, her voice quiet but steady. "I want to do it." Her mother's lips trembled. "Are you sure?" Sophia nodded. "I don't want to be scared anymore." Tears welled in her mother's eyes, but she nodded, pulling Sophia into a tight embrace. And just like that, the date was set. Sophia took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling in sync with the steady movement of the hospital bed. The fluorescent lights above her blurred into a streak of white, passing by in slow motion as the nurses wheeled her down the long, sterile hallway. The rhythmic squeak of the wheels echoed against the cold tile floor, a sound she had grown too familiar with. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, sharp, clinical, almost suffocating. The walls on either side of her were painted a dull shade of blue, void of warmth, void of life. But her heart was pounding, loud and wild, drowning out every other sound around her. Beside her, her mother walked with hurried steps, gripping her daughter's fragile hand with both of her own. It wasn't just a touch, it was a desperate hold, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Tears clung to the edges of her mother's eyes, shimmering beneath the harsh hospital lighting. She fought to keep her voice steady, but it wavered anyway. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart." It was meant to be a reassurance, but there was a plea hidden within it, a silent prayer. Sophia turned her head slightly, offering a weak smile. She squeezed her mother's hand with what little strength she had left. "I know, Mom." And the strange thing was, she actually believed it. The dream from the night before lingered in her mind like a whisper, wrapping around her like a shield. The golden garden, the warm, gentle breeze, the soft touch of her grandmother's hand on her cheek. "You are stronger than you know." Sophia held on to those words like a lifeline as the double doors to the operating room swung open. A gust of icy air rushed over her, making her shiver. The room was painfully bright, the overhead surgical lights flickering like miniature suns. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythmic pulses a reminder that this was real. The surgeons stood in a row, their faces obscured behind masks, their hands covered in sterile gloves. Their eyes, however, told the story of experience and precision. There was no hesitation in their movements as they prepared the instruments that would soon cut into her. A nurse leaned over her, her kind eyes peering over her surgical mask. "We're going to take good care of you, Sophia," she said softly. Sophia nodded, swallowing hard. A doctor adjusted the IV drip, his voice calm but firm. "We're going to count down from 10, all right? Just relax." She inhaled deeply and let her eyes drift shut. 10. The world felt distant. 9. Her breathing slowed. 8. The voices around her began to blur, fading into a quiet hum. 7. A strange warmth spread through her body. 6. Her fingertips tingled as if the edges of her consciousness were unraveling. 5. Everything was slipping away. 4. The cold, sterile hospital vanished. 3. She was somewhere else now. 2. And then, nothing. There was no pain, no sound, no weight pressing against her fragile body. For a moment, there was only emptiness, an endless void, stretching in all directions, swallowing everything into absolute silence. Time no longer existed here. Seconds, minutes, hours, it was all the same. But then, light, a faint glow, warm and golden, slowly flickering into existence. It started as a soft shimmer, then grew brighter, wrapping around her in a comforting embrace. And just like before, she wasn't alone. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her, bathed in the golden light, was Emma, her grandmother. She looked exactly as Sophia remembered, her kind eyes crinkling at the edges, her silver hair tied neatly in a bun, her presence radiating the same warmth she had always carried in life. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "Grandma," she whispered. Emma smiled, stepping forward. "Hello, my sweet girl." Sophia felt her heart swell with something indescribable. Relief, peace, or maybe it was the simple knowing that she was safe. "Am I—" She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Am I dead?" Emma chuckled softly, the sound light and soothing. "Oh, sweetheart, no, not yet." Sophia glanced around. The golden garden stretched endlessly, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and blue. A gentle breeze kissed her skin, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. It felt perfect. She could stay here forever. But then Emma reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Sophia's ear, like she used to when she was little. Her touch was warm, real. "You're going to be okay, my love," she said gently. Sophia's throat tightened. "But what if I don't wake up?" Her voice wavered, revealing the fear that had been hiding beneath the surface. "What if something goes wrong?" Ma took both of her hands, squeezing them gently but firmly. "Do you trust me?" Sophia hesitated, then nodded. Emma smiled. "Then believe me when I say, this is not your time." A sudden gust of wind rushed through the garden, carrying Emma's words with it. Sophia felt it deep in her bones, a truth so strong it left no room for doubt. She had to go back. She had to fight. The golden light swirled around her, growing brighter and brighter until it consumed everything. And then, Sophia gasped. A rush of air filled her lungs, burning as if she had been holding her breath for too long. The blinding hospital lights came back into focus, sharp and piercing. Sounds returned, flooding her ears, the beeping of machines, the muffled voices of doctors, the frantic rustling of paper. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. Then a voice. "Sophia?" It was her mother. Sophia blinked, her vision still adjusting. Through the haze, her mother's face came into view, red-eyed, trembling, her hands hovering just inches away as if she was afraid to believe it was real. A slow smile spread across Sophia's lips. "Mom." Her voice was hoarse, straight. But it was there, she was there. Her mother let out a strangled sob, pressing a shaky kiss to her forehead. "You're okay, you're really okay." A doctor stepped forward, still wearing his surgical cap, looking both shocked and amazed. The surgery was a success, better than we expected. Sophia's mind was still foggy, but one thing was clear. She had made it. She had survived. And somewhere in a place beyond this world, she knew her grandmother was smiling. The recovery process wasn't easy. Every movement felt like a battle, every breath a reminder of the war her body had just fought. But despite the pain, despite the exhaustion that clung to her like a heavy blanket, there was something different now. Something had changed. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia didn't feel like she was losing. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. The days immediately following the surgery were a blur, a haze of bright hospital lights, hushed voices, and the constant beeping of monitors filled her world. The pain was relentless, dull and throbbing one moment, sharp and searing the next. Even lifting a finger felt like trying to move a mountain. Nurses drifted in and out of her room, their footsteps soft, their voices gentle but firm as they checked her vitals. They adjusted her IV, monitored her oxygen levels, and recorded notes on their clipboards, whispering updates to the doctors. She could barely stay awake most of the time. The moment she was conscious, she felt the heavy weight of exhaustion pressing her down, as if gravity had doubled in strength. Her mother was always there, her presence a constant anchor in the storm of recovery. Sophia caught her watching her one night, sitting beside her bed, hands folded in her lap, worry lining her face. "You scared me so much, sweetheart," her mother whispered, her fingers running gently through Sophia's hair, the way she used to when Sophia was little. Sophia's lips curved into a weak smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I scared myself too." Her mother let out a breathy laugh, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Sophia's forehead. "But you're here," she murmured, "and you're going to be okay." For the first time, Sophia truly believed that. Progress was slow. The first time she tried to sit up, her body refused. It felt like her limbs had forgotten how to move, as if she wasn't in control of them anymore. She gritted her teeth, frustration threatening to consume her own, but the nurses encouraged her. "Just a little bit at a time," they said. "Your body needs to remember how to be strong again." So she tried and tried again. The day she finally managed to push herself up into a seated position, without help, the entire room erupted into soft cheers. The first time she stood on her own, her mother covered her mouth with both hands, eyes brimming with tears. And the first time she walked just a few steps across the room, shaky and uncertain, her mother cried openly. "I knew you could do it," she whispered, pulling Sophia into a careful embrace, mindful of her still healing body. Sophia's legs trembled, her muscles burning from the effort, but she smiled. It was happening. Step by step, moment by moment, she was reclaiming her life. Her doctors were amazed. "You're healing much faster than we expected," one of them admitted, flipping through his notes. He adjusted his glasses, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's incredible." Sophia just smiled. She knew why. It wasn't just medicine. It wasn't just the surgery. She carried something inside her now, a quiet, unshakable strength, something greater than fear, something greater than pain. And when the day finally came for her to leave the hospital, she knew exactly where she needed to go first. The afternoon air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The sky stretched wide and open, soft, golden sunlight peeking through scattered clouds. Sophia stood at the base of a small hill, her mother beside her. Her legs were still weak, her body still adjusting, but she stood. Step by step, she climbed the gentle slope, her mother's steady hand offering support when needed. At the top, nestled among the neatly arranged headstones, was the one she had come to see. Her grandmother's name was carved into smooth stone, the letters worn slightly by time, but still clear. Emma Bennett, beloved mother, grandmother, and guide. Sophia knelt, the cool earth pressing against her knees. She held a bouquet of white flowers in her hands, the kind her grandmother had always loved. Carefully, she laid them down, her fingertips lingering against the petals. A lump formed in her throat, but she wasn't sad, not anymore. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet. "Nana," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you." The wind stirred, a gentle rustling through the trees. Leaves swirled around her feet, dancing in the golden light. She felt it then, a presence, subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. A warmth that settled deep in her bones, wrapping around her like an invisible embrace. A reassurance that she was never alone. She smiled, tilting her face up toward the sky. "I know you're still with me," she said softly, "and I promise, I'll keep fighting." Her mother sniffled beside her, squeezing her shoulder. "She'd be so proud of you." Sophia exhaled deeply, letting the moment settle around her, letting the peace sink in. She wasn't just a sick girl anymore. She wasn't defined by the disease that had once tried to claim her life. She was stronger. She was a survivor, and she had a life to live. If this story moved you, subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.